Lisa.
Good evening. I'm Lisa Stywender, Director of Planning and Development with the City of Monroe. At the December 4th, 2018 City Council meeting, staff presented a zoning text and map amendment request to remove the Winchester Overlay District from the Unified Development Ordinance and zoning map. Council voted to deny removing the overlay district in order to provide an opportunity for new revitalization initiatives to be developed in the Winchester neighborhood. Also at the December meeting, City Council requested staff propose possible development opportunities for the vacant city-owned properties located on the south side of Winchester. And highlighted in orange are the city-owned parcels. This is Winchester Avenue, the railroad, and Morgan Mill. City Council also requested staff to conduct research on vacant property located within the Winchester neighborhood. The purpose of the research was to identify vacant property in an attempt for the city to gain ownership and then offer for residential development that would be geared toward home ownership. Planning and development staff has conducted preliminary research on vacant residential property located within the Winchester neighborhood, and we have categorized the properties into 4 tiers. And as part of an attachment in your packet is a spreadsheet of the properties outlined in the 4 different tiers. So I'm just going to briefly summarize them. Tier 1, vacant property with no city or county liens or taxes. There were roughly 15 parcels that were identified. Tier 2, vacant property with only city liens and taxes. There were 2 properties that were identified. Tier 3, vacant property with city and county liens and taxes. There were approximately 13 properties. And then Tier 4, vacant property that only had county liens and taxes, and there were none that existed in that tier. Research conducted consists of receiving a list of vacant properties for Councilmember Jordan, developing a list of vacant properties that have received code enforcement liens due to demolition. Meeting was conducted with the city attorney to discuss clearing of titles, received information from the tax collector regarding properties within the neighborhood that are ready for foreclosure. Additional research work that will be required in order for the city to move forward with gaining ownership of vacant properties and then offering for residential development. And I'm sure this is not all inclusive, but these are just some of the things that staff came up with that will need to be done. Additional title searches. Are there any outstanding liens besides what the city and what is owed to the city and county? Is the property air property? An environmental assessment will need to be conducted to determine are there any environmental issues. Development feasibility, are the lots buildable, unbuildable? What's the zoning? Is there floodplain, utilities, topography, and so forth? Will foreclosure be required to obtain ownership of specific properties? Also, if there are not city or county taxes or liens, is the property owner interested in donating or selling to the city? And then also, will the city sell or donate property once we've gained ownership for the residential development? These are all additional research and work that needs to be done and decisions that will need to be discussed in order to move forward. Councilmember Saluda Anthony, chair of the council-appointed Winchester Neighborhood Subcommittee, held a meeting with the Winchester neighborhood on Tuesday, January 29th to discuss revitalization initiatives in the Winchester neighborhood. Planning staff was requested to provide an overview of the Winchester Development Plan that was adopted in 2005 and introduce City Council's task for staff to conduct research on vacant residential properties located within the neighborhood. During the meeting, Planning and Development staff provided a recommendation to conduct an environmental assessment of the city-owned lots in the map on the screen on Winchester Avenue to determine are there any environmental issues before we seek any development opportunities. Once the environmental assessment has been completed and if there's any environmental issues, of course, mitigated, staff would recommend a feasibility study to be performed to determine what's the highest and best use of the property prior to any development opportunities. Councilmember Anthony tasked the residents with developing their ideas of how the neighborhood could be revitalized and bring to the next meeting. Councilmember Anthony tentatively scheduled the next Winchester Subcommittee meeting to be held on February 19th at 6 p.m. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Lisa, there was, I might have missed it, the environmental impact.
Mm-hmm.
You've had the request for bids go out for that?
We have not had the request for bids to go out for that. We are currently in the process of developing a request proposal that would go out for
Yeah.
bids.
Okay. Any other questions?
Lisa, the three properties that you have highlighted, those are the three that I specifically asked you to look at. Not sure why 612 Board Street, why the city, I see about the city, the tax. Do we not include the demolition, our demolition costs?
That's included in these.
Even
Wait.
on 612 Board Street?
We demolished 610 Boyd Street, but not my knowledge, 612 that I've found on
which
record.
one of these is the corner of Board and Jerome?
I think it might be the 612. I know we demolished 610 Boyd Street, and that demolition cost is reflected in the city taxes, but
Okay, now
612 Boyd, I didn't find anything of where we demolished, and it certainly wasn't done.
610 and 612, they're not a part of the same property?
Not that, I don't think so. They're two separate properties, two separate parcel numbers.
Okay, all right, well, it's the one that we demolished, that was the one I had in mind.
Okay, well then,
Yeah.
that will need to be switched.
Okay, if you'll do that one.
Sure.
Okay. Other questions, comments? Hearing none, thank you, Lee. Item 2, state legislative. State legislative agenda 2019. Mr. Jeeb, I'll recognize you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. That is the state legislative agenda that we discussed back at the December and January meetings, and at council's request, we've deferred discussion until this meeting. And it is, in terms of what you've seen in the past, it's a much shorter agenda because, as we had noted, with the General Assembly now having the supermajorities eliminated, there are some issues that we had been concerned about that we think may not be issues, but also we wanted to see how the new General Assembly worked together. So primarily, most of the items are those which are ensuring that city authority is protected and city assets are protected, as well as the conduct of local elections. We obviously talked about its protection of municipal assets, local management, public utilities, local elections, and municipal authority. But then the major issues for your consideration, and the one that is actually going to require action by the General Assembly in the form of a local act, is for a prepared food and beverage tax. During the last session, Council had requested that we pursue a prepared food and beverage tax, the authority to levy that through a referendum. And what had happened, as Council may remember, is that we brought that to our delegation. They noted that due to the nature of the short session, that the intention of leadership was to really make it a short session, they did not think that it was an appropriate item for their consideration. Plus, we believe there may have been some opposition within the delegation over the proposed food and beverage tax. So we were asked to push it back a year, and so we brought it for your consideration. What you may or may not recall, but it would be envisioned as an extra 1% tax charge on food and beverages. Staff analysis suggests that it could provide anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 per year in revenue. We think a more reasonable estimate is somewhere in the neighborhood of $300,000 to $325,000. And the purpose of that revenue, or what the revenue would be earmarked for, is debt service on the construction and the exhibits at the Center Theater and the Monroe Science Center. Any additional revenues not needed for debt service would then go to operating costs, and then any remaining funds after that would be used for future tourism projects as well as enhancements to the Science Center and Center Theater. One couple points we wanted to make. First, timing for the referendum could be determined by the General Assembly. even if the General Assembly decided to not set the referendum date on their own, because of state law, if a referendum were held this year, the only time it would be able to be held would be the November general election, which, as council is aware, would be the election for 3 members of council. So I don't know where that's coming from, that inference. But so a referendum could be held in November 2019. The only other dates then the referendum could be held would be when there are countywide elections. It's possible that if the State Board of Elections decides to hold a new election for the 9th Congressional District, that could be a possible date. But given where that the State Board of Elections is in the process, we do not believe it is likely that there would be the opportunity to get a local bill through for the food and beverage tax before any such election if they do actually hold it. So what we'd recommend is, if council feels this is an appropriate thing to pursue, we can take then steps to work on meeting with our delegation to support the introduction and passage of a local act for the food and beverage tax. There, of course, are issues for council's consideration, one of them being the fact that the referendum would likely, if it passes this year, would be held this year, and it would be held in November. Also, whether or not you feel this is an appropriate tax to be levied by the city. But we are happy to answer any questions you might have about that, about the process and what we would recommend.
Okay?
You said the question that if this tax came about, that it would be earmarked only for the Science Center and the Center Theater?
And also for downtown projects and tourism projects. That was the original intent. And typically, these special revenues tend to be earmarked by the General Assembly for something like that. One other point I would want to make, as part of our agenda, it also includes incorporating the league's annual goals that some members of council were at the Advocacy Goals Conference to approve. So that would also be in addition to your other goals.
And just for clarity, this tax is only for prepared foods and alcohol.
That would be, well, prepared food and beverage, yes, sir. It would be up to the General Assembly to further define what would be in there, but typically that's what they would charge it.
Sure.
That's what they would authorize us to do. And again, you have the option of, and as council I think had envisioned last time, it would be that that if this local act were to pass, you would have then the ability to ask for a referendum and have citizens then vote whether or not to levy the tax. You can, if you wanted, request that the council receive the authority after conducting a public hearing to levy the tax on its own, but I believe council's request last time was that it be handled by a referendum process.
I prefer a referendum, since it would be the people who would end up paying it. I would be more comfortable if they, voted on it. And if it comes about, I'm opposed to a November, we've been on the ballot in November, at the time that we have a municipal election.
Is there a sunset date on the hotel motel tax that we currently have that the TDA administers?
I would defer to Mr. Hovanek, the your tourism director, but my understanding is that while funds are being used and are available for these projects would tie up that revenue. There would not necessarily be
For the bulk of it, the current revenue that we receive from the hotel occupancy tax is paying debt service on the facility and then would help go towards the operation. There is a little bit of leftover. The main purpose of looking for the prepared meals tax would be to help sustain what we're doing, but also look to the future for possibly potential future projects.
But the tax from the hotel occupancy, is that go on forever?
Yes, sir. Yeah, there's no
There's not a
sunset
sense
on
of-
that, as far as I know.
Do you have an idea about how much that brings in on an annual basis?
I do. Defer to Lisa. I could get that information for you. I think on a good year, on a very good year, which it has been the past couple of years, I think we bring in a little over $600,000 a year. Does that sound about right, Lisa? It varies. When the downturn in the economy, we were probably about 200 to 300,000. Last year was one of our best years. The hotel industry as a whole, we're seeing an increase, but we're starting to see it level out so far the first couple months of this fiscal year.
Okay, so that's $600,000 a year. Well, not all of it, I don't guess, is available for operations and for
Correct.
debt service. It's broken down.
Yeah, I think with our debt service on the Science Center, we're looking at around 200,000 a year or so, give or take, on that. And then there's other costs, some operating.
What percentage is it that has to be used for advertising and
Yes,
that type of thing, and then what percentage can be used for actual operations?
So the first 10 years of the tax, 1/3 of it went to operations and 2/3 went into a capital project, such as the Science Center, such as the theater. After that 10 years, which was about a year ago, it's swapped. So 2/3 of that goes to operation and 1/3 goes into capital. We don't use all of that operation money. That's for staff and salaries and marketing. So we're able to quasi-roll that money back into capital. So we're going to still build up our capital for future projects, but not as quickly as we've been. So we'll be a lot more limited as to what larger projects we could do in the future.
Okay, so it's doing what it was designed to do to
Yes, sir.
to assist us after the initial.
Correct. So the first couple of
setup.
years, you're building up capital, and then you invest that into brick and mortar. So, and that's kind of where we're at now with the Science Center and theater. And I highly encourage anybody to come on out there and see the progress being made. Just let me know, and I'll be happy to meet you out there.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Ms. Anthony, was that a motion you made a while ago, or comments?
It was comments.
Okay. No other questions? I entertain a motion. Is it going down without a motion?
Council, I would, if there is concern about one item, then what we would ask from a staff perspective is that you approve the remainder of the agenda absent that item, if that is your concern. But if you wish to approve the entire agenda, that would assist us because, as we've pointed out, the deadlines for action to be taken by the General Assembly in terms of sending bills to bill drafting starts to impact at the end of this month. And we, of course, are meeting with the delegation on February the 20th and also attending the town and state dinner. So if there is to be a legislative agenda, we would appreciate council's action on it. If there is not, we understand completely.
If we remove the prepared food and beverage tax as a part of the overall plan that we are presenting to the General Assembly and then presented separately, it would not change the timeline, would it?
It would not. If you approve the remainder, we could still provide that information to them. What it would have an impact on is if you chose to, if the idea would be to take that item and defer it for another month, we start impacting the bill drafting deadlines. But if the concern also of council is to not present it at this time and present it next year, then that could be done during the short session, although you would run into the same situation you did last year.
The only concern I have is I would hate for our, and the other agenda items that we have in here are very important, from the standpoint of overall operation. And I would hate for everything that we are asking for to get held up because there might be something there that the General Assembly members may not feel comfortable with. And I think that might be the one thing that they might get held up on, especially since it's a local action and it's not something that the league can help us push for. It's not something that any other city is going to be pushing for. And of course, I'm not supportive of us doing it, but if we want to send it to the General Assembly, I'd hate for us to have all of our agenda items held up because they get bogged down with that taxing of local citizens. The General Assembly right now has just always been very hesitant to move forward with something like that.
What we can also do is if, depending on which items you approve or do not approve, if you approve the entire agenda, we can note what council's priorities are and preferences for moving forward with the delegation. We, of course, are happy to present to them whatever council feels is appropriate to present to them.
Here's your motion. I move that we approve the proposed legislative agenda minus the prepared sales tax.
I have a motion.
I'll second that motion.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Yep. So that will pass with the exception of 1% tax. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. We'll revise the agenda accordingly. We'll provide it to the delegation before the meeting and also provide to you so you see what they're getting. And then we will begin those efforts once we see them in mid-February, later this month.
Okay. Item 3.
Mayor and members of the City Council, Council was requested to consider refining the travel policy GA-02 to reduce exposure and vulnerability to allegations of waste, fraud, and abuse of governmental funds. The topic was initially referred to Council at your October 2nd strategic session and again at November's strategic session. However, that one was canceled. The topic was discussed at your December strategic session, in which Council addressed the transfer of funds between council members and then referred the policy for further discussion to today's strategic session. The initial reasons forming the basis for referral of this policy to you all involved these two basic points: that a number of current travel practices are inconsistent with best practices, and the existence of public scrutiny on travel expenses. Each of those sought to elevate my concern and attention with the current policy and its flaws and the point of increasing the mayor and council's exposure and vulnerability. The two previous strategic sessions didn't discuss the following concerns and provisions affecting 5 sections of your travel policy. I can just briefly highlight, very high level, the 5 sections. The first was Section 1, purpose. Does not clearly express that travel at the city's expense shall be for a designated public purpose. Section 7A, transportation, does not set forth parameters to use the lowest cost means of travel out of state. 7B, lodging, doesn't discourage lodging when meeting or conferences within a reasonable commuting distance. Section 7D, spouse or companion travel costs, lacks requiring existence of official city business as a basis for reimbursement of companion travel expenses. And Section 8A, items not reimbursable, it doesn't exclude or limit personal phone call charges billed to the city or the use of city credit cards. What is council's pleasure? I'm prepared to address each concern.
Mayor, may I comment?
Sure.
I agree with everything you just said. What I, as a council member, would like is for you and Majid to send this to us or bring it back at the next council meeting. It's what you propose. Then we can discuss it, and if there's something, that somebody doesn't like or what have you, they can bring it up. But I'd like to see you bring it as a package as to what you expect the city council on travel to do. And that way we can look at it. What you just said, I agree with every one of them. It's purpose, transportation, lodging, spouse, companion, the whole thing. But it's really difficult when you're looking at something that broad. When I'd rather see you bring it down, put it in the package it needs to be in, and then we'll look at it and take it from there. That would be, I'd make a motion on that, because I don't think we'll ever get there trying to go through all of this. I'd rather, that's city manager and attorney to bring it to us and let us then decide if that's what we want.
On page 17 of your packet, I have specific examples of provisions.
Where is 17?
So beginning, if council is so inclined, begin on page 17, section 1. Under the word concern is a sample provision addressing what I outlined as a concern for section 1. Travel,
17?
page 17.
Where are the numbers?
I believe your packet is numbered unless,
No, it's not.
okay, at the top of the page it says attachment. That's about the
Larry, I
third
think
page.
they've received a separate item that doesn't have the pages from the packet, so that's why they aren't aware of it.
Councilman motion made, Councilman Kazan made a motion, and I second that motion.
Okay.
As well, if we're going to be asked to go to the specific page numbers, we need to have the page numbers there. So I second that motion, that we bring this back.
All right, have a motion and a second.
Council, if I think both the attorney, the manager and I would ask you this question. As you've looked through the proposals the manager has provided, are there ones that you agree with, disagree with, or are you asking us to bring, I think the manager's has indicated that we have proposals that can be made, but are there specific ones that you agree with, disagree with, or where are you on that, or would you just prefer we bring it back as you've requested?
Bring it back.
Bring it back.
Bring it back. I
Well,
would
also-
say this, at the end of the review, it said that the conclusion that the current policy has flaws. And whatever you bring back will still have flaws. It's impossible to have a flawless policy. I just want to state that.
But that gives us a chance, Larry and Majid, to look at a policy that's been put together. And if, we may agree on 12 out of 13 or what have you, but at least it gives us framework to start from.
Okay.
I call for the question on that.
I have a motion and a
So
second.
bring it back in policy form, right?
Yeah, yeah, and, let's see,
Next
we want
month.
it in March or April? March? March.
We
February.
could do it in March, but and it would be a revision to your current policy, it would not be a
That's
separate
correct.
policy.
That's correct.
Okay. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, all yes on that.
Thank you.
All right, council have anything else to bring up? That's all for a strategic meeting. Council have nothing, we'll recess.
Yes, recess, and then we'll adjourn. once
Yeah,
that-
we'll adjourn at a later time. This time we're 4:28, we'll recess and be back at 6 o'clock. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.